West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
I think that's very apt sometimes. Sometimes the dark is very dark, the daylight far away. Sometimes I'm walking in the night surrounded by the day. Sometimes I cry a silent shout or scream without a sound. Sometimes I want to flail the air or punch the walls around. Sometimes I hear my stranger say what she has said before, and then repeats, and then repeats, and then repeats some more. Sometimes her black moods strike and bruise my offered arms of care. An angry shout, a reprimand is ever harbored there. Sometimes her time is any time. Her day is any day. A table set for 5 to dine with no one on their way. But then sometimes new times will come to lift my heart again, some offered help, a friendly call, a time to ease the strain. I find the strength to carry on, the will to see it through, and though it's hard to find the love, it's all that I can do. Beyond the shadow of my guilt, I see that distant light, the promise of a great escape from unrelenting plight. No longer trapped in stress and strain with my no longer wife, but both set free to sing again the happiness of life. Offered as wisdom for the journey. May we walk in His light.
I have been asked to read a piece that was written by Anne and Chris's daughter, Ruth. It is quite remarkable that I'm the welcomer reader today because I could have written this piece myself. My mother also suffered from Alzheimer's in the same town as Chris's wife, Anne. And so the similarities here are, for me, quite staggering. So I hope I can get through this piece okay. But this deep and heartfelt reflection was written by their daughter Ruth when Anne was still being cared for at home. Ruth is a musician who teaches the flute and is very artistic. And here she ponders on the inscrutable effects that the growing dementia is having on her mum. To my mum, who is ill with Alzheimer's disease. You have been ill for a very long time. I would like to be able to reframe that and say, you are different, but not ill. But I can't. Once upon a sunny morning, when I still wasn't sure if your illness was real or a dream, I had to wake you, roles reversed, from your lie-in. It felt so mean to disturb you, to wake you, to betray you to confusion and frustration. I often remember that moment, and it was many years ago. This morning, I sit next to you again whilst you sleep, twitching occasionally, sometimes scrunching up your face. When you wake up, you can't tell me how you feel or what your dreams are because you don't really wake up. I feel like I have been watching you from near and far with a great tenderness for a very long time. When I embrace your body, I stay with my lips on your head. Since my own motherhood, kissing the crown of a head is both so lovely and so sad. 2 tears fall on your head as you finger my arm. Are you caressing me or exploring the texture of my elbow? We are both near and far, terribly near and terribly far, in a dream which isn't a dream.
When I am frightened, will you reassure me? When I'm uncertain, will you hold my hand? Will you be strong for me? Sing to me quietly. Will you share some of your stories with me? As you are showing compassion, then I may learn to care as you do. Then I may learn to care. When I am troubled, will you listen to me? When I am lonely, will you be my friend? Will you be there for me? Comfort me tenderly. Will you share some of your feelings with me? As you are showing commitment, then I may learn to love as you do. Then I may learn to love. When you know weakness, then I'll lend my shoulder. When you feel sadness, I'll be by your side. I will reach out to you, share who I am with you. Stronger together than stronger alone. As we are sharing together, then may we learn to love all the more. Then may we learn to love.
Greta and I met Chris in London, England, when he was the audiovisual master for Greta's keynote speaking, the conference that was held in London, and I believe then up to Birmingham. And it was wonderful meeting him. At the time, he was caring for his wife. And we've kept in touch over the years and followed the triumphs and the sadness, and would never have guessed that then Chris would be part of West Hill because of Zoom. And so it's a pure pleasure. Chris also comes on early in the morning here and helps us test our Zoom volume and our room volume beautifully, saying a little bit more piano or a little less more this, and it works out very nicely. So by the time Zoom comes on, we've tested it out. So I thank him for that as well. But this is a very special time where we're he's been asked to reflect with us, to give his perspectives, and to join them with your perspective. And we'll have a little time afterwards to let that sink in and share that. So, Chris?
Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Scott and Anita, for reading the words of Ruth and myself so beautifully. It was like I was hearing it again. Thank you very much. Yes, dementia is a cruel, impartial disease, and it's affecting many in our aging populations, to the extent that many of you, probably all of you listening now, know somebody with Alzheimer's, or may even be caring for somebody with the disease. In the UK, we have a very good organisation that supports those with Alzheimer's and their carers, called the Alzheimer's Society. And I see that you do have an equivalent Alzheimer's Society of Canada, with its headquarters appropriately in Toronto. So here are just a few scary Canadian statistics discovered recently by myself online. Apparently there are over 500,000 Canadians living with dementia today. And this is predicted to rise by nigh on 1 million by 2030. Interestingly, 65% of those diagnosed with dementia over the age of 65 are women. What I'm going to do now is to relate just a few of my personal experiences of supporting my late wife, Anne, on the long learning curve through her Alzheimer's dementia, which I hope will be of interest to you generally, and even might be of help with picking up one or two ideas, hints and tips, if you're currently in the position of a carer riding on this emotional roller coaster. My wife and I had not long retired when Anne started to show the first signs of memory loss. We had been self-employed in our own small electronics repair and sales business in Exeter in the UK for 25 years before retiring in 2006, soon after which Anne began to develop short-term memory problems. Eventually, I became concerned enough to suggest that perhaps she ought to go to the doctor for a checkup. Anne refused to believe that there was anything amiss. "You forget things too, Chris," she said angrily. And I know now that it's not uncommon for denial to accompany Alzheimer's. Back in the 1960s, Anne had trained as a state registered nurse at St. Thomas's Hospital in London, and she went on to do health visiting and midwifery in Devon and Cornwall. She did have quite a short irritability fuse, well, with me at least, and both her sisters joked that she was a control freak. Many a true word. But I think Anne's I'm in charge personality and her National Health Service background may well have meant that the prospect of developing a dementia was all too clear to her and terrifying for her to accept or even contemplate. Hence her present denial. Eventually, in 2014, our excellent GP contrived to send Anne a letter inviting her to attend his surgery for a routine health check, which she'd not had for a while. In response, Anne went like a lamb. After all, this was a fellow professional, not an annoying husband. Our doctor soon assessed Anne's condition and asked her if she would mind if he referred her to what's called the memory clinic at our local hospital in Exeter. Again, Anne readily agreed, and we attended the clinic together in January 2014, where the suspected diagnosis of Alzheimer's was confirmed, of course. The whole visit for an assessment like that lasts about 4 hours, but that's a huge improvement on just a few years before, when there was no memory clinic in Exeter and a dementia diagnosis took months rather than hours to deliver. After which, those who received that traumatic news were pretty well left to fend for themselves. As one couple put it, we felt like we'd been pushed off a cliff with no safety net. Unfortunately, there are still very few drugs that can benefit someone with Alzheimer's. The most commonly prescribed in the majority of countries is donepezil. For some, this can be quite effective, at least at slowing down the progression of the disease, though it's not suitable for all users, and sadly, nothing so far can reverse the Alzheimer's condition. Unless there are contraindications like low blood pressure, donepezil is given orally, or if that causes nausea, it can be administered as a skin patch, thus bypassing the gut. When donepezil made Anne sick, she was prescribed it in patch form, and I became her PA, that is, patch administrator. Belatedly, there is now increased funding being put into dementia research, which is starting to yield some promising results. For example, it's been discovered that the signs of a future dementia can be present 20 or even 30 years before any outward symptoms are apparent, which suggests it may be possible in the not too distant future to develop strategies for stopping the disease before it becomes established as Alzheimer's or other similar dementias indeed. There's currently a team at our own Exeter University here in the UK working on a promising study, together with other researchers worldwide. Also, the first new significant drug for the treatment of Alzheimer's since 2003 should be licensed for use in the UK very soon. Its generic name is aducanumab, or something like that, known commercially as Aduhelm, slightly easier to pronounce, and it's designed to reduce what are called amyloid plaques that hinder communication between the brain cells of those affected. I think it's already licensed in the US, but Mike would no doubt correct me or otherwise on that. It's not a miracle pill, but it is a real step forward for treatment after such a long, unproductive time. I spent several years caring for Anne at home, which involved negotiating many learning curves to access help and supportive funding. In amongst a heap of literature proffered after the diagnosis was a leaflet promoting something backed up by the Alzheimer's Society, which was called Memory Matters. These were a series of 5 weekly 2-hour group sessions for newly diagnosed clients and their supporters. These meetings provide lots of practical information, not just about available support services, but simplified information about the brain itself and how memory works or doesn't. I managed to persuade Anne to come with me to the first meeting of a current Exeter group, which was being led by a delightful, knowledgeable lady called Elaine. To start with, Anne was more interested in heading for the exit door than listening to Elaine and her colleagues, but she could always be tempted back by a cup of tea, and we did eventually manage all 5 meetings together. There were a dozen or so present of those with a diagnosis and their supporters in that group, and I gained a lot from being with them all. I would imagine there are help groups like this that must exist in Canada, but I haven't checked up on that. They certainly were extremely valuable. Most there in our group who had received a diagnosis seemed aware and accepting of their condition. But as I said earlier, Anne was in total denial of her Alzheimer's, which did make any open discussion of it impossible without her becoming angry or distressed. I therefore asked Elaine after the first meeting if we could perhaps meet up for a private chat about Anne in her absence later on, which would be more helpful to me. Elaine agreed, and that was also the start of a great friendship with Elaine, which continues to this day. The arrival of COVID called a halt to face-to-face Memory Matters meetings, of course, and currently these are held on Zoom. So what's new? While not as good as face-to-face meetings in person, as we know, the modified format on Zoom has run well for Memory Matters groups now for over 2 years and continues to help many newly diagnosed couples. Helps me too as a volunteer, because now I don't have to make tea or coffee for everyone in the interval, just myself. Topics covered at these sessions include understanding the word dementia as an umbrella term covering over 100 brain diseases, of which Alzheimer's is the most common. Various lobes of the brain are discussed and described, how they work, interrelate, and can be affected if subject to disease. Various memory aids are discussed, including remembering people's names. When Anne eventually went into care, the charge nurse there was a lovely lady with the name of Annalyn Castro. I had no problem remembering Castro, of course, by obvious connections, but Annalyn, even though my own wife is called Anne, Annalyn eluded me each time I tried to remember when I was greeting the nurse. And then I hit upon an answer, which was in the form of cough mixture. In the UK, at least, there is a cough mixture called Benylin, which you can purchase over the counter. And as soon as I got that bizarre link, I had no problem remembering Annalyn Castro. Unfortunately, I never addressed her as Benylin. I was able to arrange 2 weekly 4-hour daycare visits for Anne locally, which gave me some very welcome respite. I was also helped by various kind friends who would walk with Anne into Exeter, look at the shops and chat over a coffee, and then perhaps chat again. And that gave me another occasional precious couple of free hours. A major problem for many Alzheimer's carers is lack of sleep of the diagnosed partner, caused by their partner waking at night and starting to get up or wanting to go out. Fortunately for me, once Anne was in bed, she would usually sleep right through, though getting her to bed gradually became more difficult. She started wanting to go out in the evening, usually to our local church, where she was convinced her long dead parents were waiting to meet her. Logic and reasoning often mean little to someone with an Alzheimer's diagnosis, and I soon learned that the best response to situations like this is, wherever it's practical, to go with the flow. So I used to walk with Anne to the church, which fortunately was less than 15 minutes away on foot. We'd reach the church, usually locked, of course, after which I was able to persuade Anne that nobody was inside and that we should return home, which we did. I did have a big fear that once we were back home, Anne would forget the excursion completely and insist on repeating it. But much to my relief, that never occurred. But I did soon lose count of the number of evening visits to church that we made on foot during that period. At the start of our marriage, Anne and I were regularly awoken by the clock radio alarm at 6:55 in the morning, in time for the weather forecast and the news. Alzheimer's, of course, changed that long-established tradition, and Anne would often sleep on in the morning, sometimes till as late as 9 o'clock, whereas my body clock was starting to wake me up earlier, often well before 6. If I quietly got up when I woke and left Anne sleeping, I often gained a couple of extra precious hours of which to take advantage. And the result is that now, years later, I am still a morning lark who rises at 6 a.m. and is ready for bed by 8 in the evening. Early in 2016, it was becoming obvious that Anne was soon going to need residential care. The final confirmation of this occurred when I returned home one morning after driving Anne to a daycare residence in Exeter, shortly after which our daughter arrived, as we'd previously arranged. As soon as Ruth entered the house, she said, "Dad, I can smell gas." I lost my sense of smell some years ago, so I hadn't picked that up. We rushed to the gas cooker to discover that before I left with her, Anne had turned on the oven and omitted to light it. If my daughter hadn't arrived when she did, and if natural gas wasn't heavier than air, I probably wouldn't be here telling that story to you now. As Anne would soon be going into care, an assessment needed to be carried out by Devon Social Services, so I duly applied for this. 3 months later, I was still waiting. The need was becoming more urgent, so on a nothing asked, nothing gained impulse, I emailed our local Member of Parliament, Ben Bradshaw, and briefly explained my increasing predicament. 2 days later, I received a written reply from Ben saying he was sorry to hear of my situation and would contact Devon County Council for me. The following day, I received a phone call from a lady to arrange a suitable date for an assessment to be made. Could all be coincidence? Well, perhaps, but sometimes I do wonder that if it hadn't been for Ben, how much longer I might have been kept waiting for that appointment. Anyway, eventually in 2016, Anne entered a residential nursing home within walking distance of our home address. However, it soon became clear that the home was not going to be able to meet the needs of Anne by that time, because a couple of weeks after she moved in, I received a phone call one morning from a frightened member of the staff to tell me that Anne had gone missing. Apparently, builders had been doing some work on the premises and had left the back gate unpadlocked. Anne had spotted the padlock, the open padlock, removed it from the gate, put it in her handbag and made her bid for freedom. For 3 hours, the police, Facebook and local radio were all involved in the search for Anne. I checked local places I thought she might head for, but no sign. I have no idea where she walked during that 3 hours, but the police eventually found her in a road just round the corner from the errant nursing home. There was now an obvious and urgent need for more suitable and secure accommodation, and as luck would have it, a nearby nursing home had developed a vacancy at that time, and they were willing to take Anne. So, in October 2016, we moved her into an excellent nursing home, only just a few yards up the road from her previous one. An easy move. And there she was lovingly cared for by the wonderful staff until she died peacefully in July 2018. No fewer than 5 of the nursing staff attended the cremation service, showing the genuine fondness that they had developed for Anne. It was when my time was freed up after Anne went into care that I started to volunteer with the Alzheimer's Society Memory Matters groups, partly as a response to the help that I had received myself for Anne. Paradoxically, my time spent volunteering in these groups with people who have received such a traumatic diagnosis has proved to be surprisingly rewarding and well seasoned with humour. And I continue to do help with these groups now on Zoom. Over the past few years, I've encountered some great people, both supporters and clients, and shared plenty of laughter amid the more somber, challenging content. The importance of sleep was stressed in the groups as was that of being constantly well hydrated, each topic of which triggered my propensity for limerick writing, as you may have guessed. First of all, for sleep. If energy is starting to dip and you feel you could do with a kip, a spot of power napping when vigour is sapping will get you in shape that is ship. But watch that you don't overdo it, or slumber may lead you to rue it. Stay wakeful instead. Save sleeping for bed. More cosy, if there you pursue it. And then one more for hydration. Be sure that you drink enough water. Diuretics will give you no quarter. With less uric acid, your bladder's more placid. So never drink less than you oughta. There were surprises too. On one occasion, I was helping at a Memory Matters group long before COVID with real embodied people there, when one of my jobs was to prepare and distribute refreshments during the interval, after which there was a little time for some general conversation and socializing. And during the chatting, a lady whose husband had received a diagnosis came over to me and said, "I see from your name badge that you're Chris Avis. I think your father married us." That indeed proved to be the case. But the lady went on to say that on the day he married them, my dad had said that later that same day, he was going to be marrying myself and Anne. The long arm of coincidence. My sense of humour undoubtedly helped to preserve my own sanity through this period, during which I wrote this limerick about Alzheimer's. I gave myself the challenge, here's a dreadful disease, write something funny about it. Well, I came up with this, and we're nearly at the end. There once was a bunch of old timers who forgot that they each had Alzheimer's. They met up one day, but had nothing to say, because I can't think of any more rhymers.
Okay, very good.
Surprisingly, I'm going to finish with a song. During the difficult years of caring for Anne, I modified slightly the words of an old song, which I then carried in my head through the whole of that time, and it's still with me now. It provided ongoing encouragement and reassurance for me when I despaired that there would ever be light at the end of that endless tunnel. The original song was popular during the Second World War, and it was called "I'm Going to Get Lit Up When the Lights Go Up in London." May be familiar to some of you. It imagined the anticipated celebrations that would occur when hostilities ended. My own version went like this. I'm going to get lit up when the lights go up in my life. I'm going to get lit up like I've never been before. You will find me on the tiles. You will see me wreathed in smiles. I'm gonna get so lit up, I'll be visible for miles. The city will sit up when the lights go up in my life. I'll be shining like the sun does, only more, much more. And before the party's played out, they will fetch the fire brigade out for the littest, uppest me you ever saw. Now the sun is indeed shining again in my life, and I'm doing my best to ensure that however many years may or may not remain for me, they will be fully and happily occupied, not least with West Hill. Thanks for listening.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.